Hello and welcome back to reaDIYsteaDIY. If it's your first time here, thank you so much for joining us. This is a channel where we talk about stuff, how to make stuff, how to build stuff, and sometimes how to rescue old stuff from going to landfill. I just think if something's really great, even though it's old, there's no sense in throwing it away. If you can save it, way better than letting it go. I love old video games. There's just something about the era of the late 70s and early 80s where 8-bit video games were all we had. And I love looking at how the developers worked with very little to create a fun game. I love looking at the weird, crazy graphics. I love looking at the manuals. I recently acquired a bunch of ColecoVision games. They came with manuals, which is awesome. But the problem is, one, they smelled like smoke, and two, they weren't very flat. So in last week's video, we went over how to take the cigarette smoke out of paper, and I got most of the cigarette smoke out of these manuals. They're actually passable. You can hold them in your hands now, and they don't stink like they used to. Problem, they're not all flat. So this week I'm going to create a device that will allow me to flatten them. It doesn't use an iron, don't worry. So if you want to see how I flatten video game manuals, or any paper for that matter, stay tuned right to the end. But for now, let's get started. So I know that the paper that these manuals are made of is pretty hardy. The makers of the video games knew that kids would be playing with them, so there's sort of almost like a coating on the paper. It's a little bit hardier than some paper that you might find. So the process I'm going to go through is therefore geared towards a little bit of a hardier paper. If you have a very valuable piece of paper, a very delicate piece of paper, you might want to take some extra precautions. I'm not going to take those here because these are video game manuals that are important to me, but they're not super rare. There were many copies of these games made, so if I blow it on one or two, it's not the end of the world. If you've got a document for which it would be the end of the world, if it were to get damaged, you want to be really careful. You want to make sure that the document is clean before you do this process. You want to make sure that the document does not have water-soluble media on it, like water-soluble ink, for example. So if you look at paper at the microscopic level, you'll see that it's comprised of a bunch of fibers, and in between those fibers, there's a bunch of cells or empty space. This is what makes paper what they call hygroscopic. That means those little spaces absorb water very easily and then release it very easily as well. So if you put paper in a very humid environment, it will start absorbing that humidity. And likewise, if you've got a piece of slightly damp paper, you put it out to dry, it'll release that moisture very easily. Basically, when you're trying to flatten a piece of paper, one of the more important things is to make the paper relax by hydrating it, by letting some water get into the cells between the fibers, allowing it to relax. After the paper is relaxed, in other words, mildly moist, you can then flatten it with some heavy books, and it'll take that shape much better than if you tried it without relaxing the paper first. So to do it, it's not really that hard. You need some kind of chamber. I'm going to use this Rubbermaid container, which has a lid, and it's clear so I can see as I go. I'm going to use a little bit of distilled water. I'm going to put a grate in there in order to suspend the manual above the water, because you really don't want the water touching the manual. You don't want to soak it. You just want it to absorb some humidity from the air above the water inside the Rubbermaid container. I'm going to use some hockey pucks to make sure that grate is suspended well and high above the water. And for this job, that's it. If I were working in an archives and this was a really important piece of paper, a really important document, I would cover the top of the grate, separating it from the piece of paper with a piece of spun polyester. There's a couple of brand names that archivists like to use. That sort of makes sure that no condensation or moisture, or let's call it morning dew, shows up on your paper after a while. But in this case, I've done this a couple times. I haven't needed to use that. I'm just going to go ahead and do it bare. So I put a little bit of distilled water into my little vat. I lay a couple of hockey pucks in on top of that and put the grate on top of the hockey pucks. That way I know the grate is well and suspended above the water. So if someone accidentally kicks this while it's on the ground and it's humidifying, if there's a little bit of a wave or a splash or something, it's not going to kick up and hit the manual. I really don't want to soak the manual. I just want it to absorb the moisture that leaves the water, goes into the air, and hopefully goes into the cellular pockets of the paper. So I lay the manual in, put the lid on, and leave it be. In my experience with this, it seems to take something like 4 hours for the paper to become reasonably humid. I think that's going to vary on temperature, of course. So your experience might be a little different from mine, but I've got that hygrometer in there. So once I see that the air has sort of hit that level, I wait a few hours more and check it. Nothing wrong with checking it every hour. If you're flattening a document that's really important to you, that's what I would do. I would check it every hour to make sure that it's safe. And then once it feels pretty moist, and you'll feel it goes right through, that paper is super relaxed. I want to be really careful with it at this point. It can rip super easily. Not unlike a person who's relaxed, they're kind of vulnerable, right? Paper that's relaxed is also really vulnerable. You don't want to injure your video game manual. So I carefully take it out. I'm gonna put a piece of paper towel on the top and the bottom because paper towel is super absorbent. If I were doing this as an archivist, if it were a more important document, I wouldn't use paper towel because it can stick. I would use blotting paper. I don't have any blotting paper, and I know that paper towel works in this function. I've already tried it, so I'm gonna go with that. And basically, you just make sure there's something hard on the bottom, paper towel underneath and above your manual that's damp, and then something heavy on top. Couple of books, some weights, whatever you want, and then leave it. It's gonna flatten out, let's say overnight, and it's gonna dry out again overnight. You pull it out and blammo. It's kind of cool. It's a lot flatter. You don't think something could get this flat. I have tried this with an iron and just trying to dry iron over top. It doesn't work. Relaxing the paper first is the key. And now my manuals are ready. I can read them proudly. So I hope that helped you out. If it did, please feel free to like or subscribe. Liking and subscribing is really important to a channel, especially one like this one that's just getting started. But hey, if you've already subscribed, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Perhaps you know a better way to flatten paper. Leave that one down there, I want to know. Or if you want to see something on this channel that I haven't covered yet, I'm open to suggestions. So until next week, take care, stay safe, have fun with your DIY projects, whatever you choose to do, and I'll see you next Saturday.